Hi, I'm Sarah Feldberg. Thank you. I'm Sarah Feldberg. I'm the editor for Emerging Products and Audio at the San Francisco Chronicle. And thank you so much for being here to help us kick off season 3 of Extra Spicy. We have a fantastic show for you tonight with our host, Soleil, and our guest, Dr. Gordon Walker. And before we get started, I want to give a big thank you to our sponsor, Alaska Airlines, for making this night possible, and to all of our subscribers for supporting local journalism. If you're tuning in and you haven't already, please take a second to subscribe to Extra Spicy wherever you get your podcasts. We have a fantastic season in store for you. And now, enjoy the show.
Cool. Hi. All the clapping is scary. I'm like a scared animal. Welcome to the Extra Spicy podcast. My name is Soleil. I'm the restaurant critic at the San Francisco Chronicle. If you've heard of it, I don't know. And joining me today is Dr. Gordon Walker. Oh, you got to turn on your mic.
It is on.
Whoa. Say things.
Can I say stuff? I keep talking. I thought we were supposed to do a mic check, but here we are. Okay.
Nice. Awesome. So let's start off by you telling me what you do. What's your deal?
I've been telling people recently that I professionally finger fungus on the internet, which is a weird thing to say, but it's become very indicative of what I'm actually doing on the internet. I've been working to educate and entertain people about mushrooms because when I got into them, I realized there was a real lack of kind of cool mushroom media that was engaging, and I figured I'd fill the void. And I like to go out in the woods and find cool stuff and share that with people, and hopefully give them a little bit of my biochemistry background and my interest in food, and really just get people as fascinated by fungi as I am.
So, okay, you have what, like 1 million followers on TikTok?
Yeah, it's getting up to like 1.3, 1.4 on TikTok, and another 300,000 something on Instagram. So.
What brings people to you? All the fingering or what?
I don't know, honestly. I think I've sort of gotten lucky in that mushrooms are a hot topic right now, and I'm honestly just riding the wave. There is some element of, I think I'm doing a pretty good job of science communication, and that's very much like trying to engage people, because on social media, engagement is the currency. And so if you watch my videos or you see some of the things I put out there, they are meant to elicit a strong emotional response. Positive or negative is kind of up to the person. But it is very much the idea that can I hook somebody and get them to go to the comments, get them to share with a friend, get them to actually read a caption and stick around long enough they might learn something.
Mm-hmm. And just what, I don't know, okay, so mushrooms are, I feel like it's okay to say mushrooms are trendy. I was able to locate like 3 mushroom bits of apparel to wear.
I mean, you're decked out and it looks awesome. So.
I don't know why I love mushrooms so much. It feels like this unconscious draw that just, compels me, like some sort of spiritual force. Mm-hmm. So can you explain, like, what is the sickness?
I mean, I think we all have some sort of deep animal attraction to mushrooms, and sometimes the flip side of that is you have a love for mushrooms, and some people have a real hate. There's mycophobia, there's disgust and revolt that goes along with it. And I'm not surprised by that in some ways, because the American attitude towards mushrooms is, that's poisonous, don't touch that. And that is, how many kids have heard that on the playground when they were like, what's this? And someone's like, that's poisonous, don't touch that. And so as children, we're taught to fear fungi. We're taught to learn that there's this unknown thing that we can't see, because the majority of fungi are microscopic, so you don't see them. The bodies of mushrooms, the mycelium, is down in the substrate, it's in wood, it's in the ground, so it's completely cryptic and hidden up until this mushroom bursts up. And it's this ephemeral thing that's only around for a couple of days or maybe a couple of weeks at most, for the most part. And we don't know what they are, right? There's some that you can eat, there's some that can kill you, there's some that can make you trip balls. And it's really difficult for a lot of people to comprehend that the majority of mushrooms are just mushrooms. They're none of those things, right? There's probably like, out of 14,000 mushroom species that have been identified, there's lots more, probably 1 to 2% are edible, 1 to 2% are toxic, and less than 1% are trippy. So the majority of mushrooms are just there to be reproductive organs of the mycelium. But I think that people are drawn to mushrooms because because of that sort of unknown factor, and because they represent such an insane alien way of life that is like full of cool colors and textures, and as you've seen in some of my videos, bizarre noises, that really grips people's imaginations.
I want to paraphrase this quote from Tumblr that, if you've heard of that website, that made me think mushrooms are kind of scary.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, you can't kill me in any way that matters. And that's a mushroom. At least it's a dialogue, and so like that's what a mushroom is saying to someone who's holding a hypothetical gun. It's like very complicated because it's Tumblr, but it made me feel like, okay, there's a dark side to them that is like very exciting and maybe a little sexy.
Maybe.
And in a conversation that we had before this, you said that fungi are socialist and non-binary. Like there's a level to there are many things that are threatening about them. If you're thinking as like an American too.
Very anti-establishment and very anti-capitalistic, I think.
Explain.
Okay, well, mushrooms, and what I'm talking about when I say mushrooms is sometimes we're referring to mycelium. Just to be very clear, the mushroom itself is a fruit or a flower. It is just the reproductive organ of that mycelium. So it's not really alive, like it is breathing in the same way that we are. Mushrooms are catabolic, so they break down organic matter to make energy, and they sweat just the way that we do, and exhale oxygen. Exhale CO2 while inhaling oxygen. So in some sense, like the mycelium is the thing that's actually alive, and the mushroom is really just this sort of temporary manifestation of that mycelium. But mycelium is in soil. It's white fluffy stuff that's kind of amorphous, and to paraphrase a quote from my friend Roland Sheldrake in his book Entangled Life, he says, mycelium is a way of life that challenges the animal imagination. And that's because mycelium has no central organization. There's no head, there is no fingers, no toes, no eyes, no sensory organs. It is this amorphous white fluffy stuff that grows through soil and through wood, and it grows in all directions, but it also displays intelligence, and it has the capacity to make really complex decisions about what it's doing. And that is inherently just kind of a scary thing to manifest, like, what is this thing in the soil that we don't understand? What it's also doing in terrestrial forest ecosystems is there are what are called ectomycorrhizal fungi. So these are things like chanterelles, porcini, russelas, there's a whole bunch of mushrooms that partner with trees. So they're in sort of a symbiotic relationship with the tree. There's a give and go between the mycelium and the actual tree itself. And all of that mycelium is working to link together trees in the forest ecosystem. So instead of having just singular trees, the entire forest is essentially all paying into this social security net that is being shared around by the mycelium. And so there's been actual experiments, Suzanne Simard and her husband, Dan, were people that essentially fed radio-labeled carbon to a tree and watched it end up in another tree, transferred there by action of the mycelial network.
So you're saying like forests are like natural welfare states?
Pretty much, but they've evolved that way. They've evolved because it's the most efficient way for them to exist, and because having that, let's this is an arbitrary number, but like 80% goes to the tree, 20% goes to the social security network. They're all paying into that network, and they're all able to draw from that network. If a tree gets sick, or a tree dies and is replaced by a younger tree, those sick trees or young trees can draw on that network when they need it and then pay back later in life.
So there is some like sort of revolutionary potential to mushrooms being trendy.
Definitely.
Like they can inspire us to action or other ways of thinking about, I don't know, organizing ourselves.
Yeah, and you see that in the mushroom community. You see that with mycologists, because you have people from so many different walks of life coming in and they're so excited. And I think because people are so excited about a particular topic like mushrooms, it breaks down a lot of the social barriers that might be there in terms of like age or sex or other things that would get in the way of people having relationships with each other, because they're just so excited about a mushroom that they don't care. They just are excited to find other people who are as nerdy as they are.
So I do want to kind of bring up, though, in a recent article in the Washington Post, someone who goes under the moniker of Black Forager, Alexis Nelson, spoke about how actually, like, at least North American mycology clubs are really, to quote, like, very white and very male.
They are.
So what happened? What went wrong? if mushrooms are supposed to appeal to everyone, then like why?
I think there's been a bit of a generational gap. And a lot of those clubs are dominated by people in their 60s and 70s. And there was a real lack of, I think, Gen Xers that got into mushrooms. And we've had people like Paul Stamets who've been out in the public eye for a while. But if everyone who talks about mushrooms looks like me or Paul Stamets, it's going to disenfranchise parts of society. And so like Alexis has become super famous for what she's doing, and it's awesome because it's drawing so many more people into the field. And I think what happens with some of those mycology societies is there's a level of kind of gatekeeping where they worry about people getting into foraging and going to the woods and just wholesale ripping stuff out of the ground because they're so excited. And so what myself and Alexis and Gabrielle, Chaotic Forager, are doing on TikTok is trying to educate millennials and Gen Z about foraging ethics, about responsibility, about inclusivity, and trying to kind of change the paradigm a little bit. Because yeah, there is a bunch of old white people in mycology clubs, but it's changing, it's shifting. A lot of those clubs are generally pretty open-minded. They're safe places to go and experience new things. And a lot of those clubs are also getting into elements of community science, where they're drawing on techniques that have been developed in academia, but actually putting them in the hands of people that are able to use new sequencing technologies. Like the cost of DNA sequencing has gone down massively, and the bar to entry is much lower than it used to be. So here in the Bay Area, we have lots of people doing sequencing. One guy of note, Alan Rockefeller, has been doing tons of sequencing and identifying new kinds of psilocybin species, which is the magic mushroom that everyone gets so excited about. But Alan is like a world-class expert. In Pennsylvania, we've got William Padilla Brown. He was in the Fantastic Fungi movie, and he's doing all sorts of cool stuff with cordyceps. There's a tremendous number of younger people that are getting into this from a lot of different backgrounds, and it's good to see that because we need that. Much like a forest system, the more diversity we have, the stronger of an ecosystem we are. And so that's, again, when we talk about the lessons we can learn from mushrooms, that's what I see.
Yes, I see. I really love mushroom hunting also.
Yes.
I guess I know there's some weight to using the word forage too, you know. So I guess you say gather, hunt, I don't know, look at mushrooms and take lots of pictures of them and send them to your mom, which is what I do. I guess you get a lot of of pushback on TikTok though from people who just think you're doing the wrong thing or like are trying to mushroom explain to you all the things that you like that? Thank you. You must have so much patience.
My patience runs thin on a regular basis, and you'll see it in the comments because sometimes I'm going down, if there's like thousands of comments, I go down to the first couple, I try to answer them well, and by the end I'm just like, you know, Google is free. The main thing I try to do when I put content online is to get people to research themselves. And we talked about a little this before, but I always try to present a common name for a mushroom and then also a scientific name. And that way, when you have a common name, it's really easy to get confused. You Google a common name and you get all sorts of bullshit, and you get a lot of things that are like not necessarily specific to the mushroom you're talking about. You Google the scientific name and you're gonna find primary literature papers, you're gonna find people really talking about that specific mushroom. And you can learn so much more from it. For a while, TikTok had a feature where I could include Wikipedia links. So again, people are like, what is this? And like literally just look at the link. Like it is right there in front of you. All you have to do is click that and you will learn all the things you want to know about this mushroom. So yeah, I do run thin on patience, and there's quite a bit of gatekeeping. I think there's a few issues in particular that face gatekeeping within the mushroom community. Maybe the biggest one is the debate over whether you should cut or pluck a mushroom.
I saw this.
Yeah,
Yes,
you've
yeah.
seen this,
There's a lot of beef.
Yeah, it gets me really heated.
I mean, I love hearing about the drama within, like, you know, individual kind of activities, hobbies, you know, doll decorating, and everyone has like really, there's like so much drama.
Niche specific beef.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me more. Are there other ones?
So I mean, the conception as it goes is that somehow cutting a mushroom off at the base and leaving the base of the mushroom in the ground will help more mushrooms grow, because pulling up the roots of a mushroom, which mushrooms don't have roots because they're not plants. So this misunderstanding is rooted in the fact that people still misunderstand that mushrooms are not plants. That was a misconception up until the 70s when they finally were like, oh, maybe we should give fungi its own kingdom. You're like, yeah, no time.
You can just do that?
Well, I mean, taxonomists did do that. They also didn't, they used to believe that all life was in constant competition. There was no such thing as symbiosis. Believe it or not, it was a woman who was studying lichen that proposed the concept of symbiosis. And the all-white male field was like, no, that can't possibly be true. And then 3 years later, she was vindicated.
Plants can't be friends.
Yeah. Well, and lichen is wild because it's a combination of fungus, cyanobacteria or algae, and then a bunch of yeast bacteria, all presenting as a single organism, but you can change and chop those different organisms and get different looking lichen, which is why there's so much diversity of lichen all over the world. And that's a completely separate podcast.
You're not the lichen guy, though.
I'm not, but I love lichen. It's super cool. I want to learn more. And this is what's happened to me is like, everything I learned about fungi, I just want to dive deeper. In every single subject, I learned something. I'm like, God, it makes me want to ask more questions. Like, I forget where I was going with this, but they're really cool. Cut and pluck. Yeah, so the idea is that cutting it is essentially somehow guaranteeing there'll be more mushroom harvest in the future. And the problem with this is the mushrooms that people get really activated about are particularly like porcini on chanterelles, which are ectomycorrhizal mushrooms. So those mushrooms are, the mycelium is in the ground, deep in the ground, associated with the roots of those particular trees. When a mushroom fruits up, it's probably just like a single thread of mycelium that is going up, and they're pushing a lot of resources and sugars and other things to like build that mushroom as it grows. But if you pick that mushroom, you're not disturbing the roots of the mushroom because those are attached to like the roots of the tree. So people are again misunderstanding the physiology of fungi and how they grow, and there's this assumption somehow, again, rooted in plants. It's not a bad assumption because there's a lot of plants, if you yank them up by the root, you kill the plant. That's not how mushrooms work. And so to me, when people make that really like strong, opinionated thing, like you have to cut at the base, I'm like, well, where did you learn that? And it's like, well, probably from your grandfather or some old white guy at a foraging club told you this thing, and you just assumed it was true because it was a credible mushroom person. They told you this. There was a study done in 2006. It's like Egley 2006 Conservation Biology. It was a 30-year systematic study that was done in Switzerland where they had a plot that was cut and a plot that was pluck. And they saw no significant difference in the number of mushrooms that came up or the size of the fruiting bodies. So to me, from a scientific perspective, that says there's really no significant difference between cutting versus plucking. There's a separate study done in Oregon, and again, there's a very limited number of studies on this, so there should be more. And it may be different for like ectomycorrhizal mushrooms versus saprobic mushrooms, the ones that are pure decay mushrooms. But the study in Oregon, essentially, the authors concluded that they thought, like, maybe it would actually be better to pluck it because cutting it leaves a piece of the mushroom in the soil, which could allow bacteria and other things to potentially invade down into the mycelium that's in the roots. So if anything, maybe it's better to pluck than cut. But that being said, my best practice, what I like to do, is I generally will pluck the mushroom, not always, sometimes I cut them. Stuff like polypores, which are growing indeterminately along the edge, I'd like to cut those because if you slice it off the whole base, the whole thing dies, or if you cut off the leading edge, it keeps growing, kind of thing. But I like to take like one of these mushrooms and I'll trim up the bottom and put all those cuttings back into the hole where I got the mushroom out of, and then cover it back up because I don't want the hole to dry out and I want to leave some of the mushroom matter there for the bugs and slugs to get after it. So that's kind of how I do things.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's very complicated. And like, in a way that, I think you're competing, especially on TikTok, you're competing with the people who are like in bed, like scrolling between like car crash videos, right? Yeah. And like dances and then like the mushroom stuff. And they're not gonna bring their best selves to you, unfortunately.
There's a very specific, like mushroom TikTok has become a niche. And I'm proud to say that I think I've been like a leader in trying to make that mushroom niche a thing. I'm not the only one. People like Alexis and Gabrielle and some other really great accounts have like built a whole community of people that care about mushrooms. And it's amazing to me because I think when I started, there was like, I saw one mushroom video on TikTok. I was like, maybe I should join this. Like it blew up. Why my stuff might blow up? And it did in a way that I could have never predicted.
Yeah, how does it feel to be like a mascot? A brand, a non-human?
Weird, very weird. I don't know. I'm glad that we live in the age of COVID and sometimes I can just put a mask on. I never wanted to put myself in like my face on my account. When I started my Instagram, it was really just like I wanted to hyper focus on mushrooms. And then over the years, I realized I was like, okay, short format videos are really good, and also people really identify with like a picture of a person holding a mushroom. The unfortunate part is that my face holding mushroom has been used by thousands of scammers and bots to trick people into trying to buy illicit drugs online.
What?
Yeah, so,
Ooh.
and this is the problem that the platforms do not give a fuck about creators and people stealing their images and using them as bots. And I'm sorry I swore about that, but I feel very emotionally strong about this because I've had people contact me and be like, bro, I tried to buy mushrooms from you and you scammed me. I'm like, I like for a very long time, my profile picture just said, do not buy drugs from me on the internet. And I even put it on shirts because I was like, do not buy drugs from the internet. Maybe in person, I'll talk to you about it, but not on the internet because it's not me. It's a scammer, it's a bot, it's somebody who is trying to elicit your personal information and get your financials and scam you. But they're using my face to do it, and I find that really frustrating because like Instagram and TikTok have been very slow at responding to things like that.
Do you ever find your picture on like Hinge or Grindr?
I'm not on Hinge or Grindr, so no.
Okay, I'm just wondering.
I'm on other dating apps, but that was intentional.
I mean, I would imagine like that could be the new guy holding a fish. It's like guy holding a mushroom.
It could be, yeah, maybe.
Not that I know about any of that stuff.
I'm generally really excited about mushrooms when I find them, so people key into that excitement.
So, okay, I want to talk about the dark side of mushrooms becoming trendy because, you know, I've certainly felt the call to go out into nature and just like grab all the little guys because it's, you know, that animal instinct of like, I want all the guys in my basket.
Yeah.
What are the bad things about that impulse?
So, I mean, like I said, like, I think older people in mycology clubs are very fearful of this, like, wave of young people who want to get into foraging because they are afraid of that. And I've seen that. I've been out at Salt Point where we've both gone. Salt Point is a phenomenal park. It's an amazing place to go mushroom hunting. Unfortunately, it is one of the only places that people know they can go more mushroom foraging because the Native Plant Society of California passed a bill without consulting any mycologists that made hunting in state parks illegal, or hunting mushrooms in state parks illegal.
Well, I would imagine for like native Californians, that's a huge deal.
It is, yeah, and it really, like, the mushroom community lobbied, like, can we at least have Salt Point, Jackson State Forest, and Point Reyes? And you can go mushroom foraging at those places. Point Reyes and Salt Point, you can go. There's limits on how much you can pick. And then at Jackson, you have to buy a permit. But the problem is, people should be spread out. I've been at Salt Point and run into a group of people like, we drove up from LA, and I was like, what's in your basket? And they had every single mushroom they found. Not a single one was edible. And I was like, okay, guys, you are the people that these old people in mycology clubs are worried about. You drove 9 hours from LA to go mushroom foraging, but didn't know a single thing. You picked everything you saw. And I was like, okay, we're going to take all these mushrooms and put them back into the woods because none of these are edible. I found like one or two, like, you could eat this if you want to, but like the rest of the stuff, let's just put it back. And they were just so excited. I spent a while talking to them and showing them things because all they wanted to do was learn, but there is a desire to go out there and just pick stuff. And that's where hopefully through education, we can change people's approach and say, hey, maybe like take a picture, in many ways, like leave no trace, try to like walk in and walk out without doing too much damage to the forest ecosystem because other people want to go see stuff. And that's the thing that gets leveraged at me a lot as people are like, hey, I would have just left that mushroom for someone else. I'm like, well, I was foraging and there was a bunch of them. So what you see on camera is just a representation of like one thing. And I see a lot because people are like, well, what was the purpose of you cutting up that mushroom? And I'm like, well, first of all, people like ASMR content and I'm just making it for them. Usually there's like hundreds of that mushroom out in the woods. So me cutting up a single one and then leaving it in a pile for like bugs and slugs is not a big deal because that mushroom probably would have molded over in like a day or two anyhow. I'm just helping nature along. So I think that the dark side is there's gatekeeping, but there's also people getting a little too excited and not being aware of like the ethics of the sustainability. I think there's a lot of smoke that is being blown in terms of adaptogens and supplements. And I think that's part of the dark side is that we're seeing people make a lot of money off being like, microdosed on this thing. You're like, psilocybin are illegal. Anyone who's selling you a microdose tablet is either doing something illegal or they're lying to you. And so dark side of scammers. Like literally on TikTok, I see this happen to so many people. It happens to me every single day. I make a post, I have 2 to like 8 times the amount of comments that are bots and spammers. And people who are like make a post and they mention mushrooms, suddenly they're inundated too. And they're like, how the hell does this happen? I'm like, this happens on every single thing I post. So there's a lot of bullshit out there, for lack of a better term. And that's part of the dark side.
So I wanted to ask, because you mentioned ASMR
Yes.
too. What can you get out of a mushroom as far as sound and sensory information go?
So I'm a really big tactile person, so I like touching stuff. And I think a really important point to make is that you can touch all mushrooms. Even poisonous mushrooms, you can touch them. And that's because the toxins in mushrooms do not permeate skin. So you don't want to eat it and don't put it in your mouth, but you can touch literally any mushroom. There's like one mushroom in Australia that like maybe if you like really rub it all over you would give you like kind of a bad rash. But for the most part, everything is touchable. And that's really cool because like feel this lion's mane. It's a cool texture. It's like it's a little furry, it's like a little fuzzy. Like, you know, feel this mushroom. This is like super solid. No?
No.
Is it too foul?
It's a little too
Okay.
phallic.
How about, you were touching one of these morels earlier.
Yes, I like this. I like this. It's friendly.
So morels conjure fear for a lot of people because people get trypophobia from that. See all the little irregular shaped holes? That's part of mycophobia too. People look at mushrooms and are like physically revolted by what they look like. And I'm like, well, I'm just gonna keep giving you free exposure therapy by showing you all of this cool stuff that I think is cool.
Mm-hmm.
I like touching them. I like, you know, smelling them.
I like the ones that look like they're bleeding. That's very exciting.
Heidenellenpeckia. That is the lock screen on my phone.
Ooh, yeah, disgusting. I love it.
Yeah, people get really freaked out by that one. I don't know. I think learning is very much a visual thing, but it's a touch, it's a smell. Use all of your senses to understand what you're finding, and that's what I tell people too. Is like when you go out for a hike, don't be overwhelmed by how many different mushrooms there are. Just learn one mushroom at a time. And the way that I equate this is like we live in an era where most played some sort of RPG. So imagine you're like a level 1, you know, fighter going out in the wild and you're fighting skeletons and all you can do is cast fireball. So you go out foraging and like all you know how to do is like find a chanterelle. Your friend showed you what a chanterelle looked like so you can find a chanterelle. So you go and you spam fireball and kill enough skeletons and rats until you're like, hey, I leveled up. Now I know lightning bolt.
I understand this.
And you're like, cool. Now I know what black trumpets are. So I can go forage for black trumpets and chanterelles. And then you go out and you're like, oh, now I know what a Matsutake is. So now I can cast whirlwind. And like you level up until you're like a 99 wizard. And you're like, I know all the mushrooms, you know. And that's kind of what it is. You go out and learn mushrooms one by one. And you do that by picking them up, by smelling them, by touching them, by learning what looks similar. But for a lot of things, it's like, what if people are just like, give me a rule. I'm like, there is no rule of thumb. The rule of thumb is a terrible thing to say because it was based on like the size of a switch you could beat school children with in England.
Oh my
So,
God.
like, don't use that phrase. But the problem with fungi and the problems with mushrooms in general is that they are impossible to kind of define. They defy categorization. So every time you come up with a rule, like don't eat mushrooms with white gills, there's plenty of mushrooms you can eat with white gills. There's some that can kill you, but there's plenty that won't. And it's the same thing like leaves of 3, let it be. Like there's plenty of plants that have three leaves that aren't poisonous. And there's even times when like poison oak or poison ivy present with not just 3 leaves. And so those are not robust rules. The better thing to do is not get a general rule. It's to learn each mushroom specifically.
Can you walk us through your assortment that you bought?
Sure. So we have a big assortment of commercially grown mushrooms and then one wild variety that I foraged yesterday. So this is probably the #1 mushroom that I tell people to try if they say they're mycophobic or they say they don't like mushrooms. This is lion's mane, Hericium erinaceus. It's a beautiful white rock polypore that grows on oaks. I find this a lot in Napa, especially in like good wet year. It'll be growing on like dead and dying oak trees.
I see that a lot in like vegan crab cakes.
Yes, yeah, it's a phenomenal, it has sort of a seafood-like texture. Its flavor is very mild. It has a slightly mushroomy flavor, and you can give it a sniff. Hericium to me have a very specific smell. And that's the thing a lot of people forget, that like foods generally taste the way they smell. If you want to know how a mushroom's going to taste, just smell it. You know, there's not some giant mystery there. It'll taste what it smells like. It's going to taste different once you cook it and you put sauces and seasonings on it, but that is the base flavor of that mushroom. So lion's mane is phenomenal texture. It's really awesome. It gets thrown around a lot as being something that has like neurogenic properties. I've only seen very limited evidence in like in vitro systems, so like not in a human being, but in like a mouse or on a test tube kind of thing. I don't take lion's mane supplements assuming it's going to make me smarter or somehow make me more focused. I just think it's delicious. So I tell people, instead of spending $50 on supplements, why don't you go spend $50 on lion's manes or grow kits and just share them with your friends. That'll be more fun. We have king trumpets. So these are Pleurotus syringae. I don't always know how to pronounce the species name, but I just kind of go for it anyhow, because that's note on pronunciation of science names. Don't be afraid, just try to pronounce them phonetically, because that's your best bet. People will at least know what you're talking about if you pronounce it phonetically. If you go to mushroom things, you'll hear people pronounce things different ways, and as long as they're phonetic, people will still be able to understand what you're referencing. If you start saying other weird things, then they're not going to know. But that's where common names get so confused, because people will disagree, or they'll use the same common name, but you're talking about completely different mushrooms. If you say Pleurotus syringae, or you say it a different way, you'll at least know you're talking about the king trumpet mushroom. So these are really meaty, really great. People make like vegan scallops with them, so you can cut nice thick things and do some cross hatching and fry it up in butter or whatever you want. These are shimeji, or beach mushrooms. I'm not even going to try to say the species name of them because it's absurd. But these are some of my favorites. Oh yeah, sorry, here. King trumpets for you there, nice meaty ones. Sometimes they get huge. The shimeji are, these are the lion's mane and the king trumpets. A lot of these are grown with a Japanese mushroom production method where they take a plastic jar, they pack it full of like a substrate, so it's usually like wood chips and agricultural runoff kind of stuff and a little bit of rice bran, and they core it out in the middle. They add liquid mycelium and then let it colonize for like 3 months in a relatively warm room. Then they move it, the colonized jar, to a cool room with lots of humidifiers, and the mushrooms fruit. And so they fruit out of the tops of these jars, and they cut them off, and that's how they come to you. So these don't really need washing because they never touched dirt in their life. They were wood-grown mushrooms, unlike the Agaricus bisporus, the button, the portobello. Those were grown in fermented chicken shit. So I wash those because I don't like eating stuff that grows in chicken.
So these are like the nobility of the mushrooms.
These are, for me, and they call these exotics or specialty mushrooms, and I think they're just mushrooms. You go to Asia, there's nothing exotic about these. These are everywhere. This is what people eat.
Sounds like racism.
It is a little bit, I think, yeah. There's also some real mushroom racism that people have against stuff like amanitas, because some amanitas are toxic, some are delicious edibles, but people just hate amanitas because there are toxic ones. Anyway, shiitake, great one. So most people know shiitake. It's pretty common. But they are absolutely delicious. They're incredible when you dry them out. And a lot of mushrooms get more intense flavor when you dry them. So these are less intense when fresh, but more intense when dried. They're great in all sorts of stuff. We've got enoki. Ooh, there we go. So nice big fan of enoki mushrooms. So this is Flammulina velotipes, which is a species that will usually grow on like dying trees. And in nature, it's cool because it's little brown slimy mushrooms with like a velvet base, basically. They don't look anything like this.
Really?
But they figured out how to grow them under low, it's like no light and high CO2. So they're constantly reaching out of the top of that jar, and they get these nice long little like noodly mushrooms that are phenomenal in all sorts of foods.
I love how squeaky they get when you chew them too. That's my favorite part. They like talk to you as you're, grinding them up with your teeth.
Perfect. I mean, I use them in noodle substitutes, also hot pot, all sorts of stuff. There's a version of cooking those I've seen on TikTok where they like just kind of bathe them in egg or like a batter, and then you like fan them out and fry them, and that looks really good because they get super crispy.
Okay.
I'm all about that. This is maitake, or Griffla frondosa, sometimes known as hen of the woods. And again, this is where like using common names gets confusing. Because you could say chicken of the woods or hen of the woods, and people think they're the same thing, but they're very, very different looking mushrooms. They sound like they're similar, hen, chicken, whatever. This is like nice fronds and stuff like that, whereas chicken of the woods is Latiferous sulphurus.
They're big like orange.
Yeah, it's big orange yellow, and it looks nothing like this, but they have this common name that makes them sound like they're related. They're not related. They're both polypores, and they grow on trees, but other than that, they don't really have anything in common.
So has the person who named these, like, do they know the difference between a chicken and a hen? Like, do they know what a chicken looks like?
I mean, again, common names are arbitrary. They're just what people, like old people in mycology clubs, make up and call them stuff. And like, I'm in a position now, I can start calling mushrooms anything I want, and people would probably follow what I say. I try to not do that, but I could. There's one called Cryptoporus, and I don't know if it has a common name. It's part of this pine beetle that attacks pine trees, gets in the pine tree, and it carries the spore of this mushroom on it, and this mushroom ends up killing the tree, and then the pine beetles lay their eggs in the mushroom, and then all the little beetles come out covered in mushroom spores and go infect more pine trees. But it looks like, I call it mochi of the woods, because it's like these little smooth things all over pine trees. And the problem is, it's not that bad for a pine forest inherently, as long as the pine forest is allowed to burn. Because if the forest burns, it kills all the sick trees. But if we continue to not let forests burn, especially coastal forests full of pine, which really need to burn every like 40 or 50 years, this mushroom is just completely taking over everything and killing all the good porcini habitat.
So the name sounds really cute though.
It is.
So I'm like, oh, keep the mochi.
Yeah, fine little mochi of the woods. They're all over the place. They're being moved around by invasive bark beetles. So, whoops.
Oh.
And then lastly, we have morels. These are the true morchella. So these are some of the most sought after mushrooms in the world. They're absolutely awesome. They taste super good. And I found these yesterday up in a burn in El Dorado County. So everything else here was cultivated, but these came out of the ground.
Amazing. Okay.
So you should wash these.
Yes, I
Put them in
will.
a salad spinner.
But they didn't grow in chicken shit.
They did not grow chicken shit.
So, okay, what makes the best sounds out of all of these mushrooms?
Ooh, I think the king trumpets would probably be the ones that you want to do a little tippy tap on.
Can you please?
Yeah.
Okay. I can hold the microphone.
Okay, yeah, you hold the mic. I'll bring our mushroom close, so. Yeah. So when I do this in videos, I often use my knife too. I have an open L knife. You can use literally any knife you want, but.
Videos that show this get like 1 million views.
So many views. People really like how crunchy they sound. So the other thing I do is I edit this together so that like cutting noise is like a constant thing. It's not just me sitting here cutting, like, oh, that's not that interesting. But when I nail it, so I get all the little sounds together, it's just like crunch, 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 and people are like, oh, I don't know why, but that does something for me. You know, it's fun. And I mean, honestly, porcini get the best taps. They have like the biggest resonance to them. But you know, everything has its own little sound. So let's see. I've never had a mic to do this with, so it's interesting to like kind of see how stuff sounds. Here, hold this for a sec. Let's try a little. So that's dripping lion's mane. Let's say go quick tap to our morel there. Shiitake.
Oh, that's nice. I
That's a
like
good
that
tap,
one.
yeah.
Yeah.
This is what I end up doing because I'll come home from foraging and I'll spend like all day in the woods and I'm like, I ate some dinner and chill for a while. And then at like 11 or 12 o'clock, I'm like, oh crap, I have a huge pile of mushrooms and I need to like deal with this. So what I do is I just like put them all in my butcher block and I go live on TikTok and I process mushrooms. But as part of that, I sit there and like tippy tap the mushrooms because I'm like, for whatever reason, at like 2 in the morning, people from Vietnam love to watch me tap mushrooms. And I get like 1,000 viewers of me just like tapping a mushroom.
Oh, that's amazing.
So yeah, there's a lot of good things we can do with these mushrooms.
I think my favorite videos of yours are ones where you kind of squish them like pimples and they just like, they get
Oh,
to
yeah.
that, if you like pimple popping videos, this is exactly that. And that's
that's not
what I
even a
watch.
mushroom, that's actually a slime mold.
Oh,
Which
sorry.
are, no, it's okay. The slime molds are a different, it's kingdom protista instead of kingdom fungi. And that's Lycogala epidendrum. It's the wolf's milk slime mold. And it's Lycogala translates to like milk of the wolf, basically. And they are like pink little pimples and you squish them and they ooze this pink stuff out of them. It's gross. But again, people love it. And I hate making those videos because I get weird pink crap all over my hands. But people love them so much. I'm like, all right, I'll do it for you guys.
I mean, all the perverts just like assemble like me and watch them over and over and over again. Well, thank you so much for educating me and everyone else in this room about the wonderful world of fungi and mushrooms. If people want to find your TikTok and your Instagram and all of that, where do they go?
Fascinated by fungi. I've got a website too. I have some pretty cool merch. Lots of fun mushroom designs. I've worked with artists to design. I've got a YouTube. I've got a Pinterest, a Twitter, a Twitch. I'm on like every imaginable social media platform because I've been deplatformed a couple times as well. I got kicked off TikTok multiple times as my account was growing. Again, because people are microphobic, I think is the primary reason.
They reported you for like nasty mushrooms.
Yeah, I got a
videos.
lot of report, especially when I was live streaming. I was sitting there like tapping mushrooms, and people would report me as
For abuse.
well, they'd be like, "This is dangerous, illegal activity." And like, how? Like what? I don't know. Again, mycophobia. So I'm just doing that free exposure therapy thing. But yeah, you can find me on the internet. That's where I am.
And
Or
if
in the
they
woods.
find you like in the woods, what are they allowed to tell you or say to you?
The first thing I ask is usually that people introduce me and tell me their name. Because what happens is people are like, "Oh, I love your account," and then they tell me every single experience they've ever had with a mushroom. I'm like, "That's great. I don't know your name though, and so I don't really know how to like interact with you as like an equitable situation. So like introduce yourself, then you can ask me questions or tell me about whatever cool mushroom thing you did." That's kind of my one thing. Is just introduce yourself first, and we can have a conversation.
And then they can be like, "Hey, mushroom boy."
Yeah, well, yeah. I prefer people just call me Gordon. But, you know, that's fine.
Well, thank you so much again.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for these mushrooms.
Yeah, you were gonna have to eat these or cook these. You're doing something with them.
Make it hot pot.
Okay, cool. Morels are probably just fry those in butter, but like everything else is good hot pot mushroom. So
Thank you.
enjoy it. Yeah. Thanks, guys.